You're also not allowed to say that I don't like poetry.
Okay. But are you allowed to say that?
No, we're not going to mention that.
She likes some poetry. This is recording.
For the record. This is recording?
Yeah.
Oh, shit,
recording, yeah. And I'm actually, I might have to consider including that in before my introduction. Which goes thus. Welcome to episode 2 of Talking with the Presses, presented by Poetry London Online. I'm Kevin Heslop, joining the co-founding editors of Long Con magazine, Kaylee Wakeman and Andy Verboom.
Hi. So
I wonder if, to begin, you two would speak a little bit about your backgrounds artistically, editorially, the writing that you've done in the past, the readings that have interested you, sort of where you're coming from in a sort of artistic or intellectual sense, and how that has brought you to or prepared you for your work as editors, the founding editors of Long Con magazine.
Go ahead.
Okay. Well, my impetus for wanting to start something like Long Con came from working on a small university journal that involved had a sort of call and response structure, which involved taking submissions and then soliciting replies for each of the submissions, and I kind of moved from there into Couplets, which was an event series in which artists would respond to each other within a month. Basically, I'd pair them up within a month, and then they would have a chance to share work with one another and respond to that work and collaborate on some work to present that for a live audience. So Long Con sort of comes out of the middle, for me, comes out of the middle of those two types of response slash collaboration.
And for me, I'm a really heavy reader. I read, I'd say like probably 6 short story collections or novels a month. And so and then I'm also an artist myself, like a visual artist. So for me, it was kind of combining Andy's love of poetry with my love of fiction and visual art, and that's kind of what Long Con became, is all of those things put together.
Yeah, and I'm very glad it wasn't just up to me to kind of make it a practicable reality, to make it like a real thing, because if it were, it would probably only be poetry, and I think it would suffer for that.
Yeah, I rein back the poetry constantly. There's a poetry cap for every issue. There's a poetry cap that Andy tries to push further and further each issue.
That's not
like, but
true.
what about this poem? But what about this poem? And I have to be like, dude, no.
Yes, there's a poetry cap.
Okay, so on the Long Con website, Long Con being short for Long Conversation, the long confidence game of critical authority, and the ethical potential of creativity as con artistry. I wonder if either or both of you would elaborate a little on those different sort of associations that you've grouped around the phrase Long Con.
Sure. I'll start with the first one, the long conversation, because I think that taps into what we were talking about in terms of not limiting Long Con to a particular genre or type of artistic response, or even the kind of source that each submission is responding to. That we've opened the door to everything from like imaginary architecture to like children's crafts, and we just got a submission for the next issue that is a response to a restaurant menu. And that's totally fine. So in terms of the long conversation, I think if we limited the scope of art, we'd really be losing. We don't hope to capture the entire conversation of pieces of art responding to one another and artists responding to one another, but to deliberately set boundaries would deliberately close off parts of that conversation.
Yeah, I love how many different meanings Long Con can have in terms of this conversation as well, because art as a woman, I see art and art history as like a very masculine space, and which is a con, right? It doesn't mean that women weren't creating art, or that women weren't artistic, or writing, or had those ideas. It's that they weren't given that space, and were too fucking busy, you know, like, and so like art, quote unquote, is just it's a big con. And so it's like trying to disrupt that a little bit, and like we try to be very aware of representations of artists in long con every issue. Like we have a long conversation about who about who is actually making it into the issue, and where are these people from geographically, and then like gender expressions, and all those different kind. Like we want to be really cognizant of the space we are giving people.
Yeah, and so that ties into the idea of criticism, like art criticism and art history being a confidence game, and that it's, you know, there's some bluffing when it comes to what is important in terms of art history, like the big canonical works, and so we try to counteract that first by allowing for as full a range of representation as possible in a given issue in terms of identity and experience, but also because we're deliberately not interested in publishing criticism, so reviews. We're trying to just generally stay away from nonfiction. That may change in future, and we've certainly received submissions that were structured or pitched as nonfiction that were kind of on the edge, and we were like, well, maybe we'll throw this rule out for this one. But generally, we want to stay away from criticism, so reviews and sort of academic essays and that type of thing. And then in terms of the potential for the artist as con artist, we haven't gotten there yet. We haven't really gotten to that point yet, other than, you know, having publishing pieces that respond to artworks that don't exist, that the respondent has never seen, or that might be imaginary, and that's totally fine. But if we're ever in the position where we can run a contest in the future, contest. I'm gonna push really hard for it to be something like notional ekphrasis, where it's a response to artwork that was never created. So it's response to a totally fictional artwork. That would be my drive. Her face looks skeptical.
I've never heard this idea before, so we'll see.
Yeah, it requires a little further contemplation, as it were.
Contemplation.
Sorry, Andy. So in addition to long con, I think, Andy, you've recently started with Collusion Books, and I want to say a word about that, or I want to solicit from you a word about that in a second. But you've also lately announced both of your involvements in Insomniac Press, Kaylee as an editor specializing in the novel and nonfiction, as you alluded to earlier, and Andy as a publisher. And on the question of sort of ethical practice in publishing, I wonder if you'd say a word about the press's practice of shadow editing, of which editors and publishers in the audience might take note, and why that's a route you've chosen.
Sure.
Go ahead.
You're actually shadow editing now.
Yeah, so shadow editing accomplishes two goals. One, it allows the less experienced editors get a window into the editing process, so they can.
For those who aren't aware, could you give us a definition before you discuss the value?
Right.
Sure.
Yeah, sorry. So what we're doing at Insomniac is assigning a shadow editor to each piece, or to each manuscript, and that person is going to be CC'd on all emails. They're going to be involved in all meetings, but they're not going to be giving notes or feedback on the manuscript. They're going to be, you know, a silent viewer of the conversation that's going on between the editor and the author. And yeah, like I said, it accomplishes two goals. One is it teaches a less experienced editor the process and how things are gonna go. So we can, you know, we can have people that don't have that editing experience come in and be able to participate in this process and like build up their resume and be able to like gain experience, because it's one of those things where if you don't have experience, how do you get experience, you know? So this is kind of like filling that gap that is a very hard place to just like jump into without anything. But the main reason we're doing it is for accountability and the safety of our authors, so that the authors that are working with our editors feel like they have a witness to the conversations that are happening. There's no power imbalances. There's no conversations that make them feel, well, hopefully, that make them feel like they have to go a certain way. There's always that witness to what is happening.
Yeah, and we're making this optional for all of the authors. It's kind of like they can opt out at the beginning of the editorial process or at any point within the editorial process, because the shadow editor is there primarily for them as an advocate should they need it. This is like, I think we see this as like a very safe practice. And for our first season, it might not be necessary, or authors might not feel like it's necessary for particular editorial relationships because they're working with an editor they already know. That's basically it. That sounded like it was going to be a list, because they're working with an editor they already know very well and they trust very well. And so they're just like, and they might also want to have private conversations with that editor in a way that having a shadow editor might actually gum up the conversation a little bit. So they can opt out at the beginning at any point in it, and they can also, like, if they want to have a little sidebar directly with their editor, they can just leave the shadow editor out. So it's basically just a safety
net of accountability and
advocacy for the author. Yeah.
Excellent. Okay, so something that Aaron Schneider and Amy Mitchell of the Thames Review discussed in the first episode of this sort of Talking with the Presses series was their approach to community building online, mostly through Twitter, and involved celebrating the achievements of past contributors. And I wonder if you'd say a word about how you approach social media as publishers. Like what associations you have with that space, what its potentials are, where its pitfalls are, shortcomings are.
Oh God. We've both worked for pay in social media. Kaylee significantly more extensively than I have. And both of us, I think, I don't think we find it to be an energizing activity. It takes a lot.
I do it 9 to 5.
Yeah.
I do it 9 to 5, Monday to Friday. So the long con socials for me are a chore, but the thing that I really like about the long con socials is that I feel like the assets that we create are artistic expressions in themselves, and that's what energizes me about our social media strategy, is that long con is about visuals, a large part of it, because people are often responding to visual art or film or something that has a visual nature. And so what we do is we take a piece of what they're working with. So something I just posted on our socials last week was a movie poster for the movie 12 Angry Men. And so what we do is we take that movie poster that's put up on the LongCon website to go alongside the piece that responds to it. But then for our social media, we zoom in on an aspect of that piece. And it's kind of fun to just like mess around with where you're going to zoom to create a kind of like brand new image, a brand new idea from this like bigger work. And then we take a short piece from whatever the person has written, and either that be in their bio or in a poem or in their short fiction, and then I take a short like little sentence or clip from that, and then I put it onto the zoomed in version, and then it creates this like, you know on social media the like trend of people sharing like quotes like live, laugh, love.
Oh
and
no,
shit
do
like
not
that.
relate it to this.
I'm
No.
not saying that that's what it is. I'm not saying that that's what it is, but it's kind of that vibe where it's like these short little lines from a piece that can kind of like live on their own and be their own thing, and then it's like click here to read the full poem. And so it's almost got that like live, laugh, love thing going. It's almost got like this clickbait thing where it's
why
like,
are you saying this?
because this is a social media strategy.
Right, that's true.
Like this is something that is like viral stuff, but we have kind of like made it arty and cool, in my opinion. Like that's kind of a douchey thing to say, but I think that our social media, like especially Instagram, when you can like scroll through and see everything, like it's beautiful. And it's purposeful, and it's not just like putting shit into the internet and just like for the sake of doing it. It's like making more meaningful work out of meaningful work.
Yeah, and to go back to what you said earlier, actually creating visuals and assets is super energizing. It's just the like fiddling around with putting it in the interface and, making sure you've tagged everyone and you've inserted all the hashtags. It's just a grind.
I think the thing that makes us like more interested in doing it is tweaking it and making them little like vignettes, little art pieces in themselves. Like I do the little snippets from things, but Andy does all the calls for submission posts, and like he has basically learned Photoshop for this, and like they're gorgeous. Like he does a lot of like text in front of images and behind images, and like they're beautiful calls for submissions. And I think it also sets us apart because a lot of calls for submissions are like text on a color, or they're a cover of a magazine and then like text beside it, like there's not anything to engage with, there's not anything shareable really. But I like to think that we stand apart because we try to make even that aspect of LongCon beautiful.
Agreed.
Lovely. Okay, so last question before we wrap up about the Collusion Books charitable anthologies. I say anthologies because the submission deadline for the second incarnation of that, whose theme is futures with parentheses around the S, is June 30th. So I wonder if you'd say a few words, either or both of you again, about how that anthology came to be in collaboration with Thames Review's 845 Press. And what your intention is behind the second instantiation of that charitable anthology.
She's taking off her coat. I don't know what that means. Collusion. So Collusion's a side project of LongCon, very distinct from it, definitely.
We've had discussions about Collusion's interactions of LongCon.
Yeah. I have to keep it separate because it's only poetry, and rightfully so. Kaylee does not want people starting to think that LongCon is poetry only.
One of the challenges of LongCon, I'm gonna hijack this for a second, is that our poetry submissions are compared to everything else, it's probably like 80-20 poetry.
Yeah.
So I worry, and like for a lot of reasons and reasons that are valid, but I worry a little bit that collusion will muddy. We really have to encourage people to submit music and visual art and short fiction, and so I worry that collusion will like muddy that a little bit.
And yet, collusion is conceived as an operation only to potentially fund long con and help us pay contributors. So maybe it's okay. Yeah, collusion's a side project, and I want, if any revenue comes out of it, that's going to go toward paying contributors. We're not in the, like, it's us and Kaylee's work computer and my 10-year-old laptop and Kaylee's Chromebook. Those are our assets for LongCon, like our capital for LongCon. So yeah, we can't possibly pay all the contributors, but we will be paying retroactively all of the contributors and bringing us up to the present, and then hopefully getting like solid revenue streams to allow us to pay contributors going forward. So that's where Collusion comes in. I mean, it is a chapbook press, not notorious industry for making money, but because Collusion is this, I guess, social, like tiny little social enterprise part of LongCon, it made perfect sense to start it up in orientation toward charitable giving. So I approached A45 Press, same editors as the Times Review, Amy and Aaron, and asked them. I'd just seen Invisible Books. This was like in the first couple weeks of the pandemic. I'd seen Invisible Books say that they were selling all of their ebooks at, I think, pay what you want rates, with 100% of the payment going as royalty to the authors. And I asked Amy and Aaron if they were thinking of a similar thing for 845 ebooks, and Amy came back with I think a much better idea, which was we create 2 anthologies that we use to kind of encourage and reward people who have already made donations to specific causes. The first one was our 2 big focus or foci for the first anthology was kind of food banks and community support organizations, and then small presses and indie bookshops. And so for this second anthology, it's certainly coming out of, well, just news reports that domestic violence during the pandemic spiked. Also in Nova Scotia, the news from Nova Scotia recently certainly put that in mind for us. A good focus for this charitable set of anthologies to be women's shelters, anti-domestic violence initiatives, any support organizations that are there for queer, LGBTQ, 2SIA+ individuals, and also, again, small presses, indie bookshops. If anyone buys a book from a small press or an indie bookshop that has been written by a woman or someone from someone of a marginalized orientation or sex or gender, then that'll count too. So basically, the anthologies are just there to reward giving that has already occurred, maybe to encourage more. We don't really have a way of tracking if someone has seen it and said, okay, I'll give $5 to this organization, or maybe I'll purchase a book and I'll get 2 free chapbooks out of the deal. But the response has been really good, and in terms of Collusion, I don't see an end to these charitable chapbooks, regardless of how the pandemic situation goes.
Admirable initiative, and the result of the first anthology is also gorgeous. And I noticed the paywall I suppose now when this airs will have dropped a couple of weeks ago. But I heartily encourage, to the extent I can, the audience to go check out that first anthology and submit to the second anthology. So this has been episode 2 of Talking with the Presses, presented by Poetry London Online with the co-founding editors of Long Con Magazine, Kaylee Wakeman and Andy Verboom. Thank you both for joining me so much.
Thanks for having us. Oh, sorry.
Bye.